Welcome back to another episode of the Chicagolandians, a casual sports podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Cunningham.
We're two brothers from the Chicagoland area who love exploring every corner of the sports world. Each week, we break down sports stories, ideas, and theories in a way that's simple and fun.
Whether you're a lifelong fan or just curious about the game, there's something here for everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Chicagolandians. I'm your host, Patrick Cunningham, joined as always by my wonderful co-host, Connor Cunningham.
Hello.
Connor, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Viewers of our short-form content and our online content are going to be very excited about this episode because we're recording video at a little bit higher of a resolution. So you're going to be seeing our two pretty faces on those TikToks, those reels. It's going to look real nice. So I'm really excited about that, but I know the viewers are probably a little more excited than I am even.
We will preface this by saying we were recording with a lot of new software this episode. So if by chance there's no episode this week or something explodes,
if I sound like I'm in a well, then that's on me.
That is why. But yeah, we've got some new video equipment, meaning my phone, and are recording in a different way, not through Zoom, for any video files out there that are curious. But hopefully that leads to some better short form content. But today we have a very exciting episode, like most episodes, a very exciting episode. But we just finished the NFL Combine. One of, following the Super Bowl, the next most exciting piece of NFL content that we can get. We've got a lot to talk about from the NFL Combine, some players that we wanted to highlight of the 4 days. But before that, we're going to get into some Chicago sports news. Connor, are you excited for today's episode?
I am excited. The Bears rule the NFL offseason. We've been offseason champions for 2 years in a row. So we're looking for that three-peat right now because we got a dynasty going on. But the Combine is fun. I know it's the underwear Olympics. We'll get into it later. It doesn't often translate a whole lot to the NFL. You know, they don't do it in pads. They don't do it with a helmet on. But I still really enjoy it. It's fun to watch freak athleticism out there. Really makes you appreciate the bodies that these guys have and makes you rethink the body that God has given yourself.
Seriously, looking at some linemen that can run sub 5 second 40-yard dashes and weigh 150 more pounds than me.
Yeah.
And can jump 2 feet farther than me in a broad jump is pretty impressive. It makes you wonder, why didn't God make me like that? I don't know. But before we get into that, we have some Illinois basketball news. Now, we did lose 110-67 to the Duke Blue Devils. But following that game, Illinois has been on a absolute 2-game heater, defeating the Iowa Hawkeyes 81-61. Not much to comment on this game other than the fact that Mike Cunningham and Patrick Cunningham were both in attendance at this game. Separate parties involved, but we both got to see the game. But Tomislav Ivicic had 22 points, Will Riley had 15, and Kalen Boswell had 15. But I think the big win that we can talk about is the victory Illinois had over the Michigan Wolverines, number 15 ranked Michigan Wolverines, where we defeated them again by 20 points, 93-73. And Connor, you were watching this entire game. Do you have any thoughts on the game in general or any big takeaways from that game?
So, yeah, I think my big takeaway is everyone and their mother loves to say that Illinois shoots a ton of threes.
We sure do.
You kind of hear that, and then you watch the games, and, we opened, I believe, 0 for 5 from 3. And those are the only field goal attempts that we had. So it just stares you right in the face and says, yes, we do shoot a lot of threes. And yes,
we're not making
we are a poor shooting team. So that was pretty much the entire first half, was being frustrated. But we played pretty close the entire game. And then towards the end of the game, those threes that we were jacking up just started to go in. I'm not kidding. The last 10 minutes of the game, it felt like any shot we were throwing up was going in. We banked in 2 3-pointers. It was honestly, everything was falling for us. But as for the overall outlook on the team, this does not move the radar for me. I still see these problems with our offense right now is that we don't have it doesn't feel like we have a guy who we give the ball to and say, go score. Like a guy who we feel like we have an offense that can just run through, like Io or TSJ or even Kofi. There's not that player there. It's just this offense. Sometimes it seems like we're just waiting until the clock gets down to 10, and use a phrase that our roommate says, throw up a grenade at the shot clock with 3 seconds left. I will say Boswell played out of his mind. He had a great game. He really looked fantastic, making plays both ends of the court. Trey White had 19 points. I have to say, he's the ugliest looking basketball player I have ever seen. Not like the person, like Trey White's not an ugly person, but he plays the game of basketball in an ugly, ugly fashion. Holy cow. Always looks uncomfortable with the ball. There was a fast break attempt that we had where I believe Kasparis or DGL threw a lob from half court to Trey White, which is like, who do we think we are right now? It's like the Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade and LeBron, or like the Clippers with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. It was freaking ridiculous. It did not work, but Trey White got the ball off the lob, and the Michigan defender like overshot him, and he was able to lay the ball in. And at that point, it's like, when that is falling, you know it's just your day. And I feel like that was the main conclusion. It was just our day in the sun, and everything was falling for us. So, you know, I think we are a team that can get hot, but as the stats say, we're ranked 319th in three-point shooting percentage at 31%. We are a terrible three-point shooting team, and we shoot, as you say here, we're 5th in the nation in three-point attempts. It's a frustrating brand of basketball to watch. I do think we can get hot, and I think we have rebounders and defensive players, especially if Morez Johnson can come back. We could be a dangerous team, but man, it's a frustrating brand of basketball to watch.
Yeah, so just to highlight the first half versus second half difference. First half, 3-point alone, we were 3 for 14 from 3 points.
It looked like it. It felt like it too. And one of those was KJ's banked in 3-pointer.
Yeah, so we were 21.4% from 3. Second half of the game, we decided, okay, we're actually gonna try on a couple of these threes, make them in, and we were 11 for 23 at almost 50%, 47.8%. But yeah, like Connor said, we are currently 319th three-point percentage, but we are 5th in the nation in attempts with 30.3 three-pointers per game. So
we're shooting 30 of those things, and we're making 10 of them. Yeah. We're just making 10 of them. Oh my God. Yeah.
If we made 100% of our threes, that'd be freaking 90 points right there. That'd be pretty good. That'd be way better.
Game would be over.
Yeah, like you said, Connor, it doesn't change really our standings in the March Madness tournament. I think just hopefully gives the guys a little more confidence going into the tournament. I think if we make it outside of the first weekend, it'll be a success, but maybe we'll get hot.
Hey, maybe we just need to see some shots fall. Maybe that's what it was.
Stats will tell us I think we're due for some threes to go in, so maybe they'll all come at the right time.
Yeah, maybe we'll go on a stretch of making 150 straight three-pointers, and we go straight to the championship. Yeah, that's what happened.
Moving on to some Chicago Bulls news, we have some disappointing womp news. We have Bulls point guard Ayo Dosunmu will undergo season-ending surgery on his left shoulder. Ayo this season averaged 12.3 points per game, 4.5 assists, and 3.5 rebounds per game, all of which are career highs in 46 games, but will unfortunately miss the remainder of the season. Chicago Bulls are currently 24-37 on a 1-game losing streak.
Still at 8 in Tankathon.
Yeah, so disappointing. Iowa, an Illinois guy. Tough to see him go. Connor, do you have any thoughts? This team is always injured. We got Lonzo's made of glass. We got Io's now falling out. It's tough.
So we are currently 5 games back from the Raptors up in the 6. Now I'm a little scared of the 6, but only 2.5 back from Brooklyn at 6.
Now this is back as in terms of Tankathon, right?
Yeah, in terms of Tankathon. So I think if we can get into the 5th, we're going to have a 10.5% chance of getting the number 1 overall pick. Because, I mean, right now we have a 6%. But, I mean, I'm telling you, if we get that 10.5, we can start dancing. I'm telling you, we can dance. If there's a team that has the opportunity to not get the first overall pick, it's the Wizards and the Hornets. They seem like a team that could get railed in the lottery, and instead, we come out on top. I think the Cooper Flag lottery still in play, especially with Ayo getting hurt, but I guess we'll see.
It is funny. The top 3 teams all have equal chances of getting the first overall pick. I'm seeing they all, at least according to Tankathon, it seems like they all have a 14% chance of getting the first overall pick. And if you're the 5th, you still have a 10.5% chance to get. So, I mean, those are pretty good odds considering the Wizards have 11 wins right now and 48 losses. So, I mean,
yeah, I think it's to prevent tanking. I think the point is to prevent tanking, to say, like, look, you could be by far the worst team and you'd still have the same chances as the 3rd team.
Yeah, well, that will do it for Chicago sports news. We can now move on to the fan favorite segment, the review of the week.
You can hear the applause
and we have
in the
some
background.
tremendous news because
fantastic news.
We have a review.
Yes.
This review comes from user jbone_kbone, where he says Chicagolandians features 2 strapping, knowledgeable, and well-spoken lads who speak so eloquently about our favorite sports franchises. Wow. Discovering this podcast was a highlight of my week, and I will certainly not miss a single episode going forward. Listening to this podcast makes me wish I was present to chop it up with the boys myself. An automatic subscribe on every level. A great show with 2 even better humans. Now that was written from jbone_kbone.
Hey, and J-Bone, if you ever want to come on the podcast, just shoot us a text if you happen to have our lines of communication. They're always open. Love to have you on the pod, man.
J-Bone, we have a good feeling that you know a lot about hockey and baseball. If you ever want to come on, talk about the Chicago Cubs or the Chicago Blackhawks, please just hit our line. We'd love to have you on. Now, moving on to the main meat and potatoes of this episode, we have the NFL Combine.
Now, Pat, before you get into it, meat and potatoes, I would probably say chicken and rice. Chicken and rice, not meat and potatoes.
These guys are eating a lot of chicken and rice, I would say.
A lot of chicken and rice.
A lot of chicken and rice, maybe some broccoli, a lot of protein shakes were consumed this week.
Moving on, continue on.
So we have the NFL Combine, which spanned 4 days with different position groups participating each day. Now, the 2 of us will cover each day individually, highlight some of the key players, some of the key performances, and some of just the general takeaways and things to note about this Combine. First of all, the NFL Draft is in Green Bay. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I guess I do have some thoughts on that. That doesn't seem like a spot that's getting me jacked up. I know last year was in Detroit,
no, it
right?
seems lame.
And then I think the year before maybe it was in Chicago. It was pretty recently in Chicago, so maybe they're just doing a tour of the Midwest. I mean, I don't know. I don't like Green Bay, so it seems like a crappy spot to pick. Also cold. It's probably going to be cold in April, end of April. It's not going to be nice weather.
But the main takeaway I wanted to say before we get into the specific days is just the top prospects have not been competing for various reasons, for injuries or just the idea that they're already the top prospects. So doing the Combine will only hurt their draft stock, but kind of leads to a disappointing Combine where a lot of the position groups like DB, QB, and D-end, you have the top people just don't perform. And you wait for so long, hoping to see these guys, see what they can come out in the 40, and you never get to see it happen. Specifically, this year, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Ashton Jeanty, Tyler Warren, Mike Green, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, and Walter Nolan. I mean, that's probably the top 10 picks right there. All are not participating in this NFL Combine. And as you'll see, that leads to having to focus on some kind of diamond in the rough players. Connor, what do you think is the cause of people not competing as much as maybe they used to?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, the main reason that people sit out from the Combine is often the top prospects. They have nothing that they can further show at the Combine that will make them more of the top prospect, right? If you think about last year, Marvin Harrison skipped out of doing any Combine drills because he was far and away the number 1 receiver. It's not like him running a 4.2 would make him more of the number 1 receiver, right? But if he ran a 4.8 40, he might drop outside the top 10 or something, right? So for a lot of these people, it can only hurt them. And I think agents have probably got wind of this because all of these agents, like Abdul Carter, his agent is Drew Rosenthal. He's the agent of every big-time player in the NFL. When they get drafted and they see that they can sit out the Combine and that they can still get drafted inside the top 10, they probably say, well, why should any of our top players do that? So they all decide to sit out. I think that for a lot of players, it is a very soft thing to do, just objectively.
I agree.
Especially when you look at certain players like Marvin Harrison. Like, I get it that he sat out, but he had a pretty underwhelming season compared to other receivers that were drafted ahead of him. And it's like, hey, Marv, you thought you were all that, and then it doesn't pan out that way. Or, I mean, there's a lot of players who, like, could definitely afford to up their draft stock. Mike Green is not the far and away number one edge rusher in the class, right? Walter Nolan is not the far and away number one defensive lineman. There are players who could benefit from running and they just choose not to. And I feel like it creates something that's a disappointing product. And especially when you look at some of the position groups like quarterback on the field, where you just have the back half of the quarterback group throwing, and it's just very underwhelming. So overall, I'm not in on this trend. I know the second point is that it all gets pushed down to the pro day, where for all these players, they get to do at their pro day, which, if you think about it, they can control every part of their pro day. Caleb Williams last year probably knew every route that he was going to throw, had practiced it the day before, and knew how every part of that pro day was going to go. And that's not the same type of input that you can get in Indianapolis. So for a lot of these players, they'd rather just show their talents in a more comfortable spot in their home field. Even at like Ohio State, those yard lines are a little closer too, so they run faster 40s. I think everyone just pushes it to their pro day anyways, or not at all anyways. So overall, it's disappointing though.
Yeah, I remember also last year, Jaden Daniels pointed out that he didn't want to compete because pushing it to your pro day forces a lot of NFL scouts to come to your pro day, which then puts a lot of spotlight on other players on the team. Maybe some lesser known receivers or running backs that aren't as highly recruited might be able to showcase a little bit of something at the pro day. And especially when it's in that controlled of environment, maybe someone can really show out. But yeah, it sucks. I mean, I know Caleb didn't compete last year, but.
And when Caleb didn't do that, and then he didn't do the medicals, I did think, Caleb, that is a soft thing to do. Because you know who did do all of the drills? Rome Odunze.
Rome Odunze, yeah. And
because he's a hard worker. Yeah. He's a hard worker. And yeah, Myles Garrett, far and away the number one prospect in his draft class in 2017. Everybody knew he was going to go 101. He still competed at every drill because he had the sack to say, I know I'm the number one player and I know I'm an athletic freak. I have nothing to hide. But all these players, it seems like they're too scared or they don't have the sack to go compete.
So day one on Thursday was the front seven guys. We've got our defensive ends, our defensive tackles, and our linebackers.
These are wide guys.
Yeah, big boys. Now, notable absences for the defensive linemen. We had Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, the two defensive tackles from Michigan. Both did not compete. And Walter Nolan, who are the top three, I think, defensive tackles in the draft, all did not participate.
All off my board.
Mason Graham, I think, only bench pressed, which...
All right, he's back on my board.
Just showed up and said, yeah, I'll throw 225 around for one day, but I'm not running a freaking 40.
I'm too tired.
Yeah, no. So the two players I wanted to point out were Derek Harmon and Tyleik Williams. Derek Harmon from Oregon and Williams from Ohio State. These are the 4 and 5 defensive tackles. Now, Harmon was one of the most athletic defensive tackles at the combine. He ran a 4.95 40-yard dash at 6'4", 313 pounds. That is a lot of weight moving very fast. Tyleik Williams had one of the most productive seasons last year at Ohio State per NFL.com. He was the third ranked defensive tackle. Did not actually participate in athletic testing, so didn't run the 40 broad jump or vertical, but still did the on-the-field drills and was impressive. He was fluid, moved very well. Now, where it gets more interesting is the defensive ends, the most premier position in the NFL draft. Always top 5 picks. This is the real money show. But like we said before, Mike Green, Abdul Carter, Mikael Williams, and Jalen Walker all did not participate. And following Abdul Carter's physical that is required by the NFL Combine, it was found that he has a stress fracture in his foot. Stress fracture, not something to really worry about. I think it's kind of comparable to shin splints. But per Adam Schefter, he said surgery was not advisable according to doctors. And his agent said he couldn't be more confident that this will be a non-factor when he's drafted. And he said he will put on a show at the pro day. Don't think it would affect his draft stock too much. I still expect him to go within the top 3 picks. But hey, some people want to overreact on this and let him fall all the way to the 10 to the Bears.
We'll eat that up.
I won't complain. But The standout performer from day one was defensive end from Texas A&M, Shamar Stewart, who showed up at 6'5", 267 pounds. Now, Connor, I don't know if you know this. This was down 23 pounds from his 281 playing weight in college. I've seen 281 to 290. And that is a crazy drop off. I wonder if these players know as soon as the season ends, there's like a weird mind game they're playing with their agents of which one's more important, showing up with faster 40 times or bigger weight. But yeah, he showed up very undersized. But with that shedded weight, he absolutely dominated in all of the athletic competitions. He had a 4.59 40-yard dash, which was the third fastest for defensive ends. He had a 40-inch vertical and a 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump. Per relative athletic score, he was given a perfect 10 out of 10 score. I think that was an unofficial score based on unofficial 40-yard dash times, but at the time he was given a 10 out of 10, which was the highest RAS score since 1987. He ranked first out of 1,802 defensive ends. Pretty remarkable showing.
And something to point out about relative athletic score is that Patrick Cunningham and I also calculated our raw athletic scores earlier this morning. So Shamar Stewart came in at a 10.0 in raw athletic score. Me, Connor Cunningham, coming in at 6 feet tall, 165 pounds with possibly half a rep of 225 and a 4.8 second 40-yard dash, came in at a 0.14 in the raw athletic score, which is not so good. That was probably the most humbling thing that I've had happen to me this entire month. For reference, Sam Mustipher, one of the least athletic players in the world, scored a 0.85 in the raw athletic score. So that's kind of where I'm like around a Sam Mustipher-ish kind of player.
Hey, but Sammy still found his way onto the field for many years. He still found his way onto the Bears.
Look, I say I make it up for my lack of athleticism and talent on the football field. I make up with heart and podcast ability.
But Stewart, obviously a defensive end from Texas A&M, was drawing Myles Garrett comparisons. They had almost identical combine performances, but where the two differ is their on-the-field tape, which I think is going to be one of the more interesting stories heading into the NFL draft, where Shamar Stewart, over his 3 years at Texas A&M, only recorded 4.5 sacks. In his last year, he only had 1.5 sacks and 14 tackles. Reading some articles, it seems like his tape is very disappointing. It seems like he's still kind of figuring out what his style of play is and trying to learn the position of defensive end. But it'll be interesting to see if a lot of NFL teams can look past that and see the raw piece of clay that they can mold into a defensive weapon. Now, I've seen projections of Stewart moving from back of the first, early second round pick to now jumping to a potential top 10 pick because of his combine performance, which is pretty insane considering his production on the field. And Connor, do you have any opinions on Shamar Stewart?
Yeah, I think defensive end is one of the biggest traitsy positions, I feel like, in the NFL, where purely on traits alone, you can see massive swings in draft stocks. We saw this with Trayvon Walker essentially hurdling Aiden Hutchinson in the draft a couple years ago, or players like Tyree Wilson last year, just having incredible combine performances, incredible measurables, making a huge difference. And, honestly, I think production should be taken into account. I do think defensive end, it makes sense that it's a traitsy position compared to like quarterback, where you just need somebody to be fast and strong and twitchy. That's very important. But I feel like it's so easy to just see a guy flame out just because they don't know how to play the position well enough in the NFL. And I feel like players like Shamar Stewart, I would be hesitant if the Bears ended up taking him with a guy with such lack of production. We've seen players drafted by the Bears with lack of production drafted very high. Mitchell Trubisky, for example. So for me, I think production should always at least play somewhat of a role. I get it if it's like a late round pick, you want to take a project, somebody like Austin Booker last year, but with a premium pick like top 10, I feel like I want a little more production behind my traitsy pick.
Yeah, 100%. And it's players like this and performances like this that I think would maybe make top prospects maybe want to actually compete in the combine, right?
Exactly.
I think some people just lost a lot of money because Shamar Stewart has now jumped up in draft boards because of his insane combine performance, where I feel like a lot of the top prospects could probably put up maybe not equal numbers, but certainly comparable athletic numbers and have way better production to pair with the combine performances. But now recency bias and all of the in-between time between the combine and the draft, we're going to have people falling in love with Shamar Stewart's raw athletic ability and overlooking his on-the-field production, and it could bump a lot of the top prospects down a couple of spaces and miss out on a lot of money.
100%, and especially at edge rusher where Abdul Carter is the 101. But besides that, the race for 2, I feel like, is pretty close. Players like Mike Green, Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, James Pierce, and Shamar Stewart, it's pretty tight for that second player. The combine would have been a great time for the others to separate themselves and, like you said, get into the top 5, get into the top 10, and make a big bag of money from it. Completely agree.
One of those players that you mentioned, competing for that number 2 defensive end spot, is James Pierce, who, if you remember in one of our previous episodes, Hugh said he would love to see us take him at the number 10. He's a defensive end from Tennessee. And he came in, I think, around 250 or 240 pounds. Very light for a defensive end. But with that slim frame, he absolutely dominated in the 40-yard dash. Came in at a 4.47 40-yard dash, which is the fastest among edge rushers. But what was very interesting was his other athletic statistics. He had a 31-inch vertical, which is bad. That is a bad vertical. That is...
Pat and I have a 31-inch vertical.
And a 10.3 broad jump, which both of those stats are bad, especially for a player like James Pierce, who is supposed to be this freaky, explosive athlete that doesn't have that huge size and mass, but is super twitchy and can move very fast. It's disappointing to see those measurables. Apparently, from reports also, he had disappointing on the field work, which I always think is interesting to read. Like, you always watch the highlights of the combine and you expect these players at such a high level. They've been doing these drills for so long that anytime you see them compete, you'd expect them to do well. But that 40-yard dash was certainly what people wanted to see. Last player I wanted to call out was Landon Jackson, defensive end from Arkansas, who was not an early first-round player. I think was a day 2 player, but he had a 9.88 relative athletic score with a 40.5-inch vertical, a 4.69 40-yard dash, and a 10-foot 9-inch broad jump. I think Landon Jackson earned himself some money with that combine performance. He is moving up a lot of people's boards and had a absolutely fantastic day. Connor, I'm going to cover one more linebacker. Do you have anything to comment about James Pierce or Landon Jackson?
No, Landon Jackson was a guy that Quentin Crisco, Q, on Tap Sports, mentioned in our previous episode talking about the combine as a guy who, similar to Shamar Stewart, wasn't able to put it all together on the field. But, man, you really see the athleticism with this guy. Just his frame and his explosiveness is incredible. With James Pierce, I do agree. The 40-yard dash was super impressive, and he ran in a hoodie, which is very funny. Only player I've ever seen run a 40 in a hoodie. Explosiveness was surprising, but in terms of on-field drills, I think there's certain positions that it matters more. I think for like linemen, it is a very important factor to consider the on-field drills just to see how their feet move. With James Pierce, I feel like having one bad day of bag drills shouldn't change too much about your overall opinion on him. People have bad days of practices, and I feel like if there weren't outstanding concerns about his feet or his twitchiness, you shouldn't put too much value into it overall. The explosiveness is something to keep an eye on, but I think overall the 40 was encouraging. See how he does with the pro day. I'm still not scared off on James Pierce.
For the last position of the day, we have our linebackers. There's only one person I wanted to highlight, Jihad Campbell, a linebacker from Alabama. He, I think, is the far and away number 1 linebacker in this draft class. He ran a 4.52 40-yard dash and had a 10-foot 7-inch broad jump. Impressive numbers. Now, what I thought was interesting about Campbell was he has experience at Bama playing both linebacker and defensive end. Alabama obviously has an incredibly deep roster at all positions, so he has a lot of experience moving around the field, and he stayed late at the end of the combine to do edge rushing drills in front of scouts to show people that he has that versatility, that he can do both. Jihad Campbell seems like he had a fantastic day as well.
There you go.
Okay, moving on to day 2, we have our DBs and tight ends. For DBs, notably Travis Hunter, Will Johnson, the 2 top DBs did not compete, but the people that stood out were obviously Nick Amanwari, safety from South Carolina. He posted absolutely redonkulous stats. He had a 4.38 40-yard dash, 43-inch vertical, 11-foot 6-inch broad jump at 6'3", 220 pounds. He also earned a 10 relative athletic score, ranked first out of 1,000 strong safeties from 1987 to now. According to NFL.com, Next Gen Stats had him as the #1 most productive safety last year, and then also the #1 combine performance safety this year. So he is far and away the best safety in this draft class. Incredibly impressive combine performances, one of the best combine performances we have ever seen.
He looked incredible, man. Built like a linebacker and moves
Holy
like a
smokes,
track athlete. Holy cow. Extremely impressed by him.
Yeah. The next player we wanted to highlight was Jahdae Barron, cornerback from Texas. He is considered, I think, the #3 DB in the class. The one problem with Barron right now was that he had a lot of on-the-field production, but there were a lot of questions about his athletic abilities. He comes in only at 5'11" and 194 pounds with relatively short arms. He has under 30-inch arms. Arm length is a huge factor in the combine. A lot of people talk about it. Nobody really talks about it once you actually get into the NFL, but during the combine, everybody cares about your arm length. But despite these questions about its athletic ability, he was still able to post a very impressive 4.39 40-yard dash and put to rest a lot of the questions about his athletic ability and solidify himself as, I think, a day 1 pick. Now, 2 other players that I wanted to highlight were Darian Porter and Maxwell Hairston, 2 DBs that are not day 1 picks. I think they were early day 2 picks, but both put up incredibly impressive combine performances. Porter was the best performing corner out of everybody else. He ran a 4.3 40-yard dash, had a 36.5-inch vertical, and a 10'11" broad jump at 6'3", 195 pounds with 33-inch arms. He's a converted receiver, and I think that showed in a lot of the drills. He had very soft hands. Also did the combine in long sleeves. I had never seen somebody do that before. Was an all black, long sleeves, long tights. Didn't know what was going on underneath. But Darian Porter earned himself a lot of money with his performance. It's on Friday. And then the last DB I wanted to highlight was Maxwell Hairston, corner from Kentucky. He had a 9.68 relative athletic score, and what was impressive about him was his 40-yard dash. He had a 4.28 40-yard dash, had the fastest 40 of any position of the entire weekend, and a 39.5-inch vertical. A very impressive combine performance. 40-yard dash is always something that's going to get you moved up in people's draft boards. Tight end was the other position that competed on Friday. The 2 top prospects, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, both did not participate. Both are dealing with various injuries. The only player I thought was also worth talking about was Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. Posted the fastest 40-yard dash at 4.63 and had a 10'2" broad jump, 39-inch vertical, and a 1.55 10-yard split, which is another very important measurement people are looking at, coming in at 6'5", 247 pounds. But that'll do it for the first 2 days of the combine. Connor, I'm going to kick it to you. If you want to comment on this day in general or just jump into day 3.
I think you did a great job with it. I don't think I have any points more for the DBs or the tight ends. I know Q mentioned that it's a deep tight end class, so I'd love to see us maybe take another tight end with the departure of Gerald Everett. And of course, you can never have enough DBs. So I think some of these guys you talked about, I definitely would not mind if the Bears took a chance on. But moving on to day 3, on Saturday, we had the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs participate in the NFL Combine. So main takeaways, the QBs, kind of a nothing burger from the quarterback class, but honestly, what can you expect? We had Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders both sit out. Players like Quinn Ewers and Will Howard did participate. Jackson Dart did participate as well, but in general, quarterbacks' performance at combines are kind of just a nothing burger. You're throwing in shorts on air with no pressure, not too much to take away. What is surprising, though, is when players legitimately just look bad at throwing on air with no pressure, like Will Howard. Now, Will Howard, I will say, thought he looked ass the entire season at Ohio State, and I was surprised that he won a national championship. To the surprise of nobody, he did again look terrible throwing the ball at the NFL Combine. Inconsistency with his velocity and very poor and inaccurate deep balls. You know, you kind of just got to check the box at the Combine of throwing, and he did not check the box. Other main takeaways. The running back class looked incredible. We've already identified that this is an extremely deep running back class with 10 or more fantastic prospects, and they came out and performed. With a lackluster performance from the tight end class, the running backs really showed out. There was a lot of big dudes who ran very fast, sub 4.5 times. We'll get into it later, but there were some very impressive performances from the running back class. Last takeaway was that there were 2 Texas players, Isaiah Bond and Jaden Blue, who both said they would break the 40 record. I don't know if they were in cahoots with each other or just because they're both Texas guys like Xavier Worthy was, but they both said that they could run 4.1 or 4.2. Isaiah Bond said, I will break the record tomorrow. I'm going for 4.2. If I'm feeling good enough, maybe I'll go 4.1. He ran a 4.4, and Jaden Blue ran a 4.4 as well. Guys, both great times, but you can't be out here saying that stuff. All right, moving on to some actual positions, though. We hit on quarterback a little bit, but I thought another fun stat about quarterbacks was that only 3 quarterbacks ran the 40-yard dash, and I wanted to say, how much of this do you think is because of Patrick Mahomes' 40 and how he is always used in simulcasts? Because I think before it was very common to see quarterbacks run the 40. Mahomes ran the 40, Trubisky ran the 40, Baker Mayfield ran the 40, Josh Allen ran the 40. I can think of like Lamar Jackson being one of the main quarterbacks to just not run the 40. A lot of quarterbacks ran the 40, but now I'm wondering if because of that simulcast, maybe they're hesitant about running the 40. Another fun fact, Jalen Milroe, his hands measured in half an inch larger at the combine than they did at the Senior Bowl. Something to keep in mind. Maybe on draft day, they will be a full inch larger than they were at the Senior Bowl, or there was just a mismeasurement at one of those things. But, something to keep in mind. But that's all we're going to talk about with the quarterbacks. I think my main takeaway is, hey, I'm glad we have our quarterback in Chicago right now. Also, I wish Jalen Milroe ran the 40, but we didn't get to see that. All right,
he didn't do any athletic stuff.
I know.
That's like his thing. You would think a player like that who's not seen as like a fantastic passer, but is a freak athlete, you'd think he would want to do as much as he could to separate himself.
Well, I feel like it's the same Lamar Jackson thing of like, he wants to be a quarterback. Lamar didn't run the 40 because he didn't want to show people his 40 time, right? I mean, Lamar Jackson was a Heisman winner. Jalen Milroe was not the best
quarterback.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jalen Milroe was I think he was a Heisman finalist at one point. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Jalen Milroe was not the player that Lamar Jackson ever was. Yeah, so moving on to the running backs, this is a little bit more of a pertinent position with Ben Johnson coming in. First, we have Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech. He's a pretty productive running back at Virginia Tech. He's a little undersized at 5'11", 206, but he balled out in the 40-yard dash with a 4.32 40-yard dash and a 40.5-inch vertical. Both of those were best amongst the running back position. He also had a 10-foot, 10-inch broad jump. Super impressive day from Tutin. He's an explosive back who does have pass-catching abilities. He could be a day 3 pick. I wouldn't mind if the Bears took a shot on him as well. Omarion Hampton, this is a bigger player. This is probably the 1B or the RB2, maybe the RB1B behind Ashton Genty. He is a big boy, 6 foot, 220 pounds. He ran a 4.46 40-yard dash and a 38-inch vertical. He looked incredible out there on the field as well. Looked extremely athletic. Overall, I think he solidified his position as the second running back in this class. A couple other players to hit on quickly was Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. So Trayvon Henderson and Judkins were both the 2 Ohio State running backs. Henderson did run faster than Judkins, but Judkins is 220 pounds. He's a big player. He's 20 pounds heavier than Henderson. Was still impressed with his performance. He had a 4.48 40-yard dash, 38-inch vertical. I wouldn't be surprised if he also sneaks into the first round as well. He had an 11-foot broad jump as well, which was one of the best of all running backs. Last player was DJ Giddens from Kansas State. 9.78 raw athletic score, 4.43 40-yard dash. Think he could be another player that could sneak into day 2. Overall, though, you saw how this is an explosive running back class. The biggest loser was definitely Caleb Johnson, running back from Iowa. Extremely productive running back. The main concern, though, that people had was his speed, and he ran a 4.57 40-yard dash with a 1.62 10-yard split. Both of those are pretty concerning numbers, and he did, per one report, he did look awkward in pass catching drills. The quote that I saw was, he tends to clap down on the ball as a pass catcher instead of smoothly bringing it in, which in my opinion was kind of a what the hell does that even mean comments from a reporter who probably didn't play college or NFL football, but that was just my opinion. I think the main thing was, though, he did have a slow 40. I'm less concerned about the pass catching drills. I assume he's a fine pass catcher, but the 40 is something to keep in mind. Hopefully he can get a better time at his pro day. But overall, I'm not too concerned about Caleb Johnson as well. I do think he's a very productive running back at Iowa. I wouldn't be upset with him getting drafted as well. Other loser from the draft is probably Cam Scatabo. He was able to compete in the broad jump and the vertical, but he did not compete in the 40-yard dash. He's a player that was extremely productive last year. He rushed for 1,700 yards at Arizona State, was incredible in the college football playoffs, but there are concerns about his long speed that he has, and to be able to not show his speed at the combine was a little disappointing as well. Moving on to wide receivers, so I feel like there were two players who really stuck out at the combine. The first was Matthew Golden of Texas, so he's the other Texas receiver besides Isaiah Bond. He ran a 4.29 40-yard dash, which was the second best 40 at the combine. So while his teammate Isaiah Bond was talking about breaking the 40 record, he actually came out and ran an extremely fast 40-yard dash with a 1.49 10-yard split as well. This will likely push him as the wide receiver 2 or 3 in this class behind T-Mac. So I think he could end up sneaking into the first round from this performance. Other player was Jalen Knoll from Iowa State. He had a 41.5-inch vertical, a 4.39 40 at 5'10", 194 pounds, and an 11-foot 2-inch broad jump. He really had a great combine performance, looked fantastic at on-field drills as well, including the gauntlet. One report emphasized how great he looked at the gauntlet running at full speed. A lot of guys will slow down through the gauntlet to make sure that they can catch each pass. He was going full speed through the gauntlet, which was impressive as well. His teammate, Jaden Higgins, looked great at the combine as well. Had a 6'4", 214 pounds, 4.47 speed with a 1.53 10-yard split, 40-inch vertical. Could be another day 2 pick, round 2 to 3 to keep an eye on. While probably not a huge need for the Bears with the possible departure of Keenan Allen, I wouldn't mind if we at least target a receiver in this draft. Some losers that we had was Isaiah Bond, obviously from Texas. A 4.4 is definitely a fast time, but you can't be out there saying that you're going to run 4.1 and then run 0.3 slower. But my main comment was Isaiah Bond felt like every kid that you would talk to in high school about their 40-yard dash. There's certain players that I will not name here who would always talk about their 4.5 speed or their 4.4 speed, and then, you just play a football season with them and you think, look, man, we don't have to pretend what we can run right now. We can all just be honest. You're not a 4.4 guy. Isaiah Bond, you're not a 4.1 guy. It's okay. Isaiah Bond, big loser from the wide receivers. And last is Tez Johnson, who was a great receiver at Oregon. He tortured U of I. He's a really talented player. Measures in at 5'9", 154 pounds. I think that's the lightest player that might have ever weighed in at the combine. Maybe only behind Tutu Atwell or a guy like Tank Dell. Extremely undersized. But he ran a 4.51 40-yard dash, which at that size is very slow. On the field, he looks very fast and very explosive. He's still at a 37-inch vertical and a almost 11-foot broad jump. Both great explosive numbers, but that speed was very concerning from a guy of that size. He's been compared to Tank Dell, which I think is a fair comparison, but really would have liked to see a fast 40 from him, especially at that size. But those were the main takeaways from day 3. Pat, any thoughts there?
My one thing looking over these notes is seeing how good the prospects Iowa State has. We've talked about 3 of their players already. 2 of the top receivers that you talked about, both from Ohio State, and then that DB. Those guys really had a fantastic season. It's more exciting to see a college other than like Bama or Georgia produce the top talent. So seeing Iowa State guys, I think is cool. Yeah, I mean, that is pretty insane to come in at 154. Yeah. Obviously, we talked about it already. Which one do you weigh more, production on the field or your actual measurables? Tez actually had 83 catches for 898 yards and 10 touchdowns. Previous year, he had 1,100 receiving yards. So obviously is able to do it on the field. Yeah. But pretty crazy numbers to just have such a disappointing 40-yard dash. You would think at that light of a weight, 154 pounds, you'd be able to move so much faster.
And he looked fast on the field, too. He looks like a fast player. And I think people always talk about field speed versus combine speed. You're not running the 40 in pads. You're not running with a helmet on. You're not running with players running by you as well. So maybe Tez is just more of a field speed guy. Now, moving on to day 4, this is where the big boys, the beef, offensive line competed. My main takeaway is that there's still concerns at the top of this draft class, especially at the tackle position. And I don't think this combine did anything to subdue those concerns with the tackle position. Will Campbell specifically did not measure well in arm length, which is the biggest concern with him. He did have very short arms. It seems like there's very few actual projectable tackles in the top tier of this class who would be worth a top 10 pick. We'll talk about it, but Armand Membu from Missouri looks like he's probably going to go in the top 10 and might be the first tackle taken over Will Campbell. He had a great combine performance, but the main takeaway is that there's just not a lot of quality tackles at the top of this class. I think there's a lot of solid offensive linemen. There's a lot of athletic linemen who could project as great guards or interior offensive linemen. And there's depth overall at tackle positions, but that top tier talent I still think is missing from this class. Some standouts that we had: Josh Connolly Jr. from Oregon, a first round talent that we've talked about a little bit throughout this draft season. I remember Q talked about him as well with an 8.69 raw athletic score. Jared Wilson from Georgia. Now, the Bears have shown interest in Drew Dahlman from the Atlanta Falcons, who's a great center. But if we don't sign a guy like Drew Dahlman in free agency, Jared Wilson could be a guy that I would love to see us draft. He had a 4.85 40-yard dash, breaking 21 miles an hour. That's the fastest that a center has ever recorded in the 40-yard dash. I think that's a top 5 time for any offensive lineman ever. At a 32-inch vertical, a 9.4 broad jump, all at 310 pounds. His feet looked buttery smooth on the field per reports as well. Looks like he could be a second-round player, could sneak into the first. I wouldn't mind if the Bears took this guy with our second pick if we don't end up signing a guy like Dahlman in free agency. Another guy from Georgia. You saw a lot of great performances from Georgia offensive linemen. Tate Ratledge, he is a guard, moved extremely well at the combine at 6'6", 308 pounds, hit a 4.97 40-yard dash, a 32-inch vertical, and 9.5 broad jump as well. Also had the best three-cone time, and three-cone is an important measurement for offensive linemen, especially guards when you're thinking about trap plays or quick movement in the offensive line. You want to be able to move side to side. So overall, he looked great in trap drills as well. Membu from Missouri, who we talked about before, he's only 20 years old, had a fast 10 and fast 40, yelled throughout his entire 40-yard dash too, which was fun to watch, but he came in at 4.91 with the 40. He's 6'4", 332 pounds. He had a fantastic combine performance, and I think probably moves into the top offensive lineman in the class, especially the top tackle in the class. We'll talk about him later. I still think Will Campbell is the most talented lineman here, but from a pure tackle perspective, I think Membu is the only player that is worthy of a top 10 pick at the tackle position, but he looked great overall. Next, we have Will Campbell. So Will Campbell measured in at a 77 3/8 inch wingspan. This was the shortest in the entire class. Per Mock Draftable, this was the lowest wingspan, or the shortest wingspan in the entire Mock Draftable database. And he was asked about this all the time during his interviews, about his arm length, about do you project to be a guard or a tackle in the NFL? He said himself that he's been hearing this his entire life. He's ready to prove people wrong once again in the NFL, that he can still play this tackle position. I think the main thing that you could see with Campbell, though, is that he would be a good tackle in the NFL. I think he is fast enough and talented enough, mean enough to be a good tackle. But he could be an incredible guard. The way his feet move, he could make a all-pro guard in the NFL. Are teams willing to take an all-pro guard like that in the top 10 in the NFL? I think they should be. Guys like Zach Martin or Quentin Nelson were high priority picks who ended up being career players for those teams. But I think Will Campbell is going to be an extremely divisive player in this draft class, especially seeing players like Peter Skoronski last year, where arm length is such a concern at the tackle position. But moving on, the last player is Gray Zabel. This is an offensive lineman from North Dakota State. He's 6'6", 312 pounds. He had a 36-inch vertical, so he is 150 pounds heavier than Pat and I, and he can jump 5 inches higher than us, which is insane. But Zabel, he gets a lot of buzz kind of in that late first, early second round area as well. Looks like he's going to be a guard or interior offensive lineman, even though he played tackle at North Dakota State. Another interesting player that you see a lot, but he had another great combine performance. But I think that's it from day 3 and 4. Overall, I think from the running backs, you saw a lot of what you expected. You were a lot of players you thought were going to ball out the combine, and they did. Wide receivers, pretty similar. Nothing really stuck out besides Golden. I think from the linemen, though, the main takeaway was Campbell's arm measurements coming in well below what you were hoping them to be, and some fast and quality depth in the interior of the offensive line.
We had a text with friend of the pod, Kevin Donahue, about how this combine has potentially changed the Bears' outlook, or their Ryan Poles' potential strategy for the NFL draft. Do you think this changes anything with the disappointing measurables from Will Campbell? Does that hurt his draft stock? Do you think we look defense first with that number 10? Do you think that strategy changes at all?
Well, I think it depends. I think if you're looking at Campbell as a guy who you're hoping to slide in at tackle, I think it would have to change your opinion on him. But if Poles had him on his board as his top interior offensive lineman, don't see why it would. I think with running backs, hopefully it helps maybe change his opinion a little bit about seeing the depth that really exists at this position. Maybe getting him a little bit off of Genty at 10, who wouldn't be my first pick at 10, but I could convince myself that it'd be all right. So maybe he sees the depth here at this position. And at edge, I hope maybe he saw James Pierce and was impressed with the 40-yard dash.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, certainly an exciting time to be an NFL football fan, but I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Chicago Landians. We had a good coverage of the NFL Combine. I'm sure there will be many draft breakdowns and position breakdowns in the upcoming weeks, but if you enjoyed this episode, I want to say thank you, and be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen, and maybe we'll read out your review. And if you want more Chicagolandians content, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at Chicagolandians. We're putting out content every Monday and Friday. Surprisingly high quality content. Now with our new cameras, going to be looking even better. Well, that'll do it for today's episode, and we will end with a hearty bear down.
Bear down.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Chicagolandians. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you want more Chicagolandians content, you can find us everywhere at Chicagolandians.